Hey, it's good to have you back. We're going to be talking today about managing your financial resources. And what does that really mean? It can mean different things to different people. Now, the first thing that I'm going to start with is my rule, which is the 28, 33, 36, 40 rule. And no, we are not playing football. On this particular rule, as we're going to work through, you'll see how the different numbers come into play on managing your resources. It doesn't really matter whether you earn $1,000 a month or $10,000 a month or $100,000 a month. We can use these percentages regardless to what your resources are to help you with your budgeting and then also with some of the things that occur over time with your cash flow. Now, what is that 28% rule? Well, the 28% rule has to do with your housing. So for every $1,000 of income, I'd really like to see you spend no more than $280 or 28% on your housing. The more you make, the higher that amount can go. Now, I know for some of you, depending upon the area that you live in, trying to stay within that number is going to be very difficult. If that is the case, then what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to reduce what we spend in other areas. Which brings me to the point about, well, we got to manage your mortgage for those of you who are home buyers. Well, there's some information that we're looking at on that too. Well, how are you going to qualify for that mortgage? Because it's going to make a difference down the road. Are you qualifying on a mortgage based on one income? Are you basing it on two full-time incomes? And if you're doing that, you're probably stretching just a little bit far at times, because there are times when you may be out of the workforce for a period of time. Maybe you're unemployed, which is a dramatic drop in income. Maybe you have to step out of the workforce to care for a parent or someone you see that coming. Are you going to have children? Were you planning to stay home for a period of time? Will you be able to afford childcare? Well, what if you have twins and you have double the care expenses on what you had thought about at that point? So when you are testing some of your budget methods, I want you to look at what's realistic. If we lost one of the incomes in the household, would you still be able to afford to stay in the home, or would it become a really deep, dark debt hole for you and not a good thing going into your future? So let's not look at just what it looks like with two wage earners, but what's going to happen if we lose one of those earnings? Would be able to make those payments out of savings, or what's our backup plan? Always have to have a plan B. So let's talk just a minute. Got a slide for you about your monthly gross income example. Why am I going back to the 28%? Well, if we pull an income and let's say you make $7,000 a month, it's just a number, then we'd want to stay with about no more than $1,960 a month on what you're having on your housing. And I know some of you say, well, that's not that high, but let's think about this. If I've got 28% of your income that's devoted to the housing, we've got 7.65% that is your Social Security taxes. But wait, some of you are self-employed. That Social Security is going to jump up to 15.3% of your income. Now, what about your income taxes? Well, those are going to range from another 10 to 37%. Then if you live in a state that has state income taxes, there went another 3 to 10% of your income. And then we haven't even talked about installment debts and student loans and car loans and those type of things. So when we're looking at your income as a whole, you've got a pretty good levy on that income before you ever bring it home. Or if you are self-employed, you got to do those tax estimates, and you sometimes are losing easy. I'm looking at 37 cents to more on the dollar that's going to disappear to taxes. Let's talk a little bit about, can you afford a house? One of the things that I tell my clients when we're building into the budget is I want you to set aside an additional 3 to 10% of the value annually in order to do your maintenance and your repairs. Now, if we had a $200,000 house, well, that's going to be $6,000 to $20,000 a year. And that breaks down to be an additional $500 to almost $1,700 a month you need to build in the budget. Now, if it is a well-maintained home, you're going to be in the lower percentages, but you still need to put the money away. Some of you are going to pick up houses that are fixer-uppers. Well, fixer-uppers require more cash until you can get it at the level that you can maintain it, and you've accomplished repairing, fixing, updating some of those problems that made the property a little less expensive compared to properties that were move-in or turnkey ready. Now, I want you to remember this money that I want you to set aside for your normal maintenance and repair. Now, that's not your redecorating money. That's for things that are going to occur over time. You're going to need a new furnace or an air conditioner. What about the roof? Electrical problems. Do you need to replace the refrigerator? So think about any updating or redecorating that you're going to do. Well, that's going to be a little different source of money or savings that you're going to set aside at that point. Now, there's another hidden cost with staying in your house, and it has to do with some of the acquisition and then selling a home. I usually use as a rule of thumb with my clients that when you purchase a home, I would say about 10% of whatever the value of the home is going to go for other things, whether that is a moving expense, that is a little bit of minor updating. Maybe you have to do additional furniture, you've got utility deposits, whatever the case may be. Usually 10% is a pretty good number to work with. Now, when you are exiting a home, for example, you're going to buy it and this is going to be a starter home and you're going to let go of it in 5 or 7 years. I think you're going to lose another 10% easily. And the 10% in that case, we generally are going to have a real estate commission. You're going to have some maybe attorney's expenses. You're going to have document preparation fees. In some jurisdictions, you're going to have a transfer tax or something along those lines. Therefore, if I've got a $400,000 house, just hypothetically, and I'm looking at selling it, then I would expect to lose easily $40,000 of my equity or the value at the house at the closing table. Could be a little more, could be a little less, but that's a pretty good rule of thumb. Now, if I'm only planning on staying in that house for 5 years, when I'm looking at the equation, I'm going to take that $40,000 of expected cost to liquidate or sell the property, and I'm going to divide that by 60 months, which is the same as 5 years. And I'm really paying an additional $667 a month because that's going to catch up to me at the back end when I go to sell the property. So that really is an additional cost of owning the property. Now, if I was going to look at selling it probably in 7 years, I'm expecting my family dynamics to be a little bit different. That in that case, be an extra levy of about $476 a month. But I call that one of the hidden costs because you don't necessarily think about it. Now, if we're looking at that 28% rule that your housing expenses should fall under, I've just taken a hypothetical $400,000 home. The rate at the time that I did this was at 4%. We all know rates go up, rates go down, but this is for an example. So on a $320,000 loan, I've got a monthly principal and interest payment of $1,528. I did my insurance and I estimated it at 1.5% of value. So that's another $500 a month. I have taxes. I estimated those at 1.5% a month. Some jurisdictions, it's much higher than that. Some it's a little lower, but $500 in this example. And then I put normal repairs and maintenance at 3.2% of value. Then I took and I added into that the selling cost that I'm estimating in 5 years that I will be absorbing because that's built into my equity. So to own this $320,000 house in this scenario, I'm looking at a real outlay of about $4,262 a month. But that's not all. On top of that, we've got to add your electricity, or if you use propane or gas, do you have an alarm system? Do you have cable? How about bug spraying? Do you have homeowners association dues? Do you have condo fees, pool, yard, landscaping expenses? Now, when you put all of those items on them, they don't show up in your monthly mortgage payment for many of these expenses, but they certainly add to the cost of living and staying in this particular property. So it can be substantially more. The other thing I want to spend a moment on is I get a lot of questions about, should I do a 15-year loan or should I do a 30-year loan? I can only qualify for a 30-year loan. A 15-year loan is a little bit of a stretch for me, assuming that you stay in the house for the term of the loan. Some of you will, some of you will not. If I go back and I am looking at the different values and what your payments would be, in each scenario, if the interest rate is the same, for the first example that we have on our home loan, if we're paying it for 15 years and my principal and interest is $1,479 a month, over the life of the loan, 15 years, I will pay back $266,220. Now, if I have the same loan at 30 years, and the payment is only $955 a month, I'm going to pay that for the 30 years, and I'm going to pay back $343,800. That is 38.8% more for the house when you're taking a 30-year loan versus a 15-year loan. For some of you on qualifying, you think the only way you can do this is on a 30-year loan. Depending upon your circumstances, and I would encourage you to talk to your professional advisor and your financial advisor about this, you may want to make extra payments towards the principal. You may not. You may want to accrue funds and at the end of 15 years, pay it off if you want to drop down the overall amount that you pay for your home. And you'll see that there's some other examples there. In each scenario, you're looking at almost 40% more on what you're really going to pay for that house if you're doing a 30-year loan versus a 15-year loan. I get the question, well, if I have low interest on my mortgage, should I still pay it off early? The answer is, I don't know. Are you putting other items on credit cards and you're paying much higher interest in order to do that? Well, then it's probably not a good idea. Are you able to itemize deductions? With the increase in the standard deduction over the last several years, most people cannot itemize anymore. Do you see a reduction in income coming on the horizon where making the current payments are going to be difficult? Maybe a refinance is in order. Are you eliminating savings in order to reduce your mortgage, which goes back to having to put a lot of items onto credit cards and increasing the debt? So you're having a false savings or economy there. Did you eliminate life insurance in order to reduce your mortgage? Well, I'm usually not very much of a fan of that, because in the event of a premature death, when there's a significant mortgage on the property, if we have a couple, whatever that dynamics of the couple may be, can they make the mortgage payments without life insurance, living on only one salary? The answer in many cases is absolutely not. So before you look at paying off a low interest mortgage early, hey, I'm not perfect, folks. I make mistakes. Before you look at taking a low interest mortgage and paying it off early, take the time to talk to a financial advisor and then also talk to your tax professional so that you can design what is really going to be the best thing for you. Now, there have been some difficulties. There always are. And with that, there are some individuals that maybe you went a little too far. Life hasn't worked out the way you anticipated. You're getting near to foreclosure. You can't make the ends meet. This isn't looking good. And this is one of the hardest questions sometimes you need to ask. Is it time to walk away? Do you need to release this property to save you financially from further hardships? Are you near foreclosure or way behind on payments? It's killing your credit. Do you have condo fees stacking up that you cannot pay? Most of the condo associations, they've got a little clause in there that they can foreclose or they can put liens against your property if you don't pay them. It also makes it very uncomfortable with the neighbors and the people on the board who generally live in the same unit with you. Now, did you borrow more than you could afford? and now it's really catching up to you. Some of you are going to experience a divorce, a job loss. Maybe you had a forced early retirement that you really didn't anticipate. What about medical issues that have dramatically changed what your earning power is and your ability to go work? With the cash flow, are you unable to do the regular repairs and maintenance so the house is actually declining in value because you can't maintain it? The other thing that happens is, well, what happens when you have death occurs to an owner? Now what happens to the mortgage? Well, the mortgage doesn't go away. If you have a co-borrower, they're going to be responsible for paying off the rest of the mortgage. It could be tied up into your estate and the probate process. Any equity could be subject to creditor claims. Your heirs may or may not end up with your house. So let's talk a little bit about the titling of the property. Well, does it matter? And I'm going to tell you absolutely yes. One of the things you may see behind the titles is JTWROS. Well, that stands for Joint Trust with Rights of Survivorship. Some of you are going to see tenants in common. You may have only one person on the title in a couple for whatever reason. It might be trust owned. It could be a mess. It could have multiple owners with different fractions, but you need to understand what the titling of the property is because it has a huge impact on what happens when it comes down to paying a mortgage, who's liable for the mortgage, and then also who actually owns the property. One of the quick rules of thumb that I have used over the years, if you're trying to decide if it's time to switch from being a renter to doing home ownership, is what I'll call the 1% rule. If you can rent an identical property for 1% per month of the value versus owning it, I often will lean you towards renting that property. Remember when we talked a little bit before about all of the different costs with ownership? If you are a renter and you can get that property for less than 1% of the value, you're not on the hook for the repairs, the maintenance, and all of those things that could go along with that. Now, in looking at the different examples, we'll use the one we had before. If you were in a $400,000 home and you could rent that home for less than $4,000 a month and have none of the liabilities that go along with it other than the lease that you signed, how does that compare with the numbers that we looked at before? Because it was almost $4,300 a month if we were looking at buying the home before we put all of the utilities and everything else. And again, you're on the hook for any repairs, maintenance, that type of thing. So 1% rule. If it was a $400,000 house and I could look at that house and potentially pay $2,800 a month for it, I'd be hard pressed to buy it if it was me. Now that we've spent some time on the 28% rule, let's take a minute and let's talk about the 33% rule. Well, for every $1,000 of your income, no more than 5% or $50 should be in installment debts. That's being proven. Now, I want you to know something, and I want you to think about this. Now, auto loans hit a record high not too long ago, and we went back and we were looking at it. The average amount borrowed for a new vehicle was just over $32,000, and a used vehicle was just over $20,000. Those amounts could very easily result in car payments that were between $391 to over $550 a month. That's dramatically going to affect the amount of cash that you have available when we're looking at the mortgage or the loans and qualifying. So all of these things really do work together. And something I'm going to bring to your attention, a car loan payment, that is not mandatory. It's really optional. It depends on how you save, whether you can pay cash for a vehicle, whether you sell your own, but it is not always a mandatory expense. If you can keep a vehicle longer, once you have retired the debt, instead of living on that money, maybe you put it away for a couple of years. That helps you get out of that and you're paying cash for cars going forward. Let's talk about the 36% rule. Well, for every $1,000 of income, ideally, You'd want to spend about no more than 3% on your transportation type costs. So we're looking at your gas, oil, maybe you have tolls, those type of things that we're going to build in. So now we've covered 28, 33, and we're at 36%. Now, again, remember some of these numbers, and they can fluctuate a little bit depending upon the dynamics of your house, because we can have credit cards, braces, student loans, car loans, all different kinds of things that are going to affect those percentages. But again, anything that you have a regular installment amount on, those have got to be accounted for as a part of your cash flow. Now, I am aware that many lenders will go up to 40% of your income before you've ever deposited it in the bank for loans. Usually they'll stretch a little bit on a car loan, figuring that you're going to make those payments because you need to go to work and you want to have leisure. So on your $1,000 of income, when we're looking at your housing, we're looking at installment debts, we're looking at your transportation expenses, we don't want to have more than 40% of your income tied up. And I frankly think that's rather high. And that's going to be difficult to maintain on a long-term basis. Because on top of that 40% rule, we got to remember that we have got to pay what? If I have 40% of my income that is already taken up with debts and those type of things, now I've got to have, remember that Social Security we talked about, which is 7.65 a W-2, 15.3 is for your self-employed person. We've got income taxes of another 10 to maybe 37%. You may have state income taxes. It doesn't leave a lot of money left over for you to do other things. Now you're going to see where I've got a slide up here, and I've made it so simple. We're going to pretend that you make $1,000 a month, and we're going to allocate no more than $360 a month, which is 36% towards our expenses. And we've got a couple of examples. So if I look at number one, we had a house payment hypothetically that's $100 a month. And we've got $200 a month in installment payments, which is one of the reasons we couldn't qualify for quite as much house. The only amount or the room there was left was a $50 car payment because we had so much that was already committed. And with that, we've got $350 of the $360 maximum that we were trying to stay within. Again, you know, if you made $10,000 a month, you're just going to use that multiplier. If you look at example number two, we have $305 that's being spent on housing. We have $55 on installment debts, and we didn't qualify for a car loan because we're already spending the $360 a month. So your housing is taking up more of your budget. Now, if I look at number three, a little different. We've got $285 on the house payment, but we've got $120 in installment debts. There is absolutely no room for a loan because we have $405 committed, and we've exceeded what that 36% goal usually is. Now, there's something else that has come up over time because we have seen a lot of natural disasters over the last few years. This has caused tremendous hardships on a lot of families. And there are things that have come forward out of this that we need to be aware of, especially when we're looking at individuals who are struggling. Maybe the house has been paid off. Maybe they're into retirement. But a couple of examples that I have seen. An individual had their home destroyed in a natural disaster. They are retired. A little bit older, but the house was paid for. Didn't let the kids know that we had not been paying the insurance premiums. So when the disaster struck, they had about $250,000 of damage to the home. They own the home. Well, they were able to potentially qualify for a 30-year SBA loan. However, they only make $863. I'm sorry, they make $900 a month in their Social Security. That's it. Modest Social Security. They didn't have a pension. Well, at $900 a month in their income, there is no way that they are going to qualify for an SBA loan for $250,000 if it takes $863 out of their $900 a month. And then in addition to that, because the loan would have been more than the $25,000, we got to have insurance, which is another $500 a month. Absolutely not going to happen. Okay, let's go backwards. They may be able to take 28% of their income to use towards this, which would be $252 a month. That's only a $73,000 loan. And that's still not going to work because it's over $25,000. So we're going to have the insurance for another $500 a month. At this point, it's not going to work. So what I'm trying to get and share with you is my concern that I've got for some of our seniors or some of the individuals that have relatively modest means that they've paid off the houses, but they are in potential disaster loans. If they're not paying the insurance and if they're not letting anybody know how much they're struggling, in this case, this particular scenario, the family thought that there was going to be an inheritance and that there was a house that was paid for and all of those things. No, what they have now is a shell. They could sell it for a very small amount of money, but that house is not going to be rebuilt. The children can't qualify for the loans, and it's just not a very good situation. So these percentages, it doesn't matter whether we have a disaster or not. These things are going to come into play because if the money is not there to do the repayments, you're not going to be able to qualify. And it's just a very sad but bad situation, that we'd like to avoid. So that gives you some of the 28 to 33, 36, and 39. So in looking at those various areas, there's another thing that I want to add on that. Depending upon what your faith walk is, on many of my clients, part of that faith walk that I hadn't talked about in some of the earlier expenses is you also have a tithe. So you may be paying a tithe that is an additional 10% on top of that. So that's another item that we have to keep thinking about at that point too. That's going to fall into play. And then there's the rest of your expenses. Yeah, we have some of those. Do you have childcare? Whether it is for a child or for an adult. Some of us are caregivers and we might be doing adult daycare so that you can work during the day. Do you have school expenses? Any of you ever need to buy clothing? Do your car ever need fixed? How about car insurance, life insurance, disability insurance? Do you have health insurance? Yes or no? You still usually are going to have some out-of-pocket expenses there. Maybe you have prescriptions on an ongoing basis. You need groceries. You may want to travel at some point. We also need to have savings, and there's probably going to be a little bit of charitable donations that go in here. So the list can go on and on and on. And that's why it's very important not to tie up too much of your income before it even comes in the door. Now, this is a real quick exercise I want you to do. Grab your phone so you can type it in, grab a piece of paper, but I really want you to write this down. And I want you to write the numbers 1, 2, and 3. I want to know what you in your household have as your top 3 priorities. Nobody else's, your top 3. And I don't want you to think about this really hard. All right, number 1. Write down what you think is your number 1 priority. Quick. Okay, number 2. I want you to write down number 2, what you think is your second priority. Real quick. Number 3. I want you to write down what you think is your third biggest priority that you have. You're not going to be graded on this. This is just for you. Now, I want you to step back and I want you to think about what your real 3 top priorities are. And your real 3 top priorities are probably going to be very different. And the way that you determine what they are is based on the amount of money that you spend on them. So I'm going to give you a couple of real life priorities. that maybe were not what the person expected. There was some clients that I worked with, and they were struggling financially. And it's like, we make good money. We own our home. We just don't understand where the money's going. And we really want to save for retirement, and we want to take vacations, and there's no money for that. And we just don't understand. So we started picking through the expenses and going through, and I started asking questions and had them get me some numbers. And then we came back to meet a little bit later. And as we sat down, I said, your very top expense, your top expense and your top priority are your horses. And they said, oh, no. I said, yes, your horses are your biggest priority because that's where the bulk of the money is going. In this particular scenario, when we took into account on the horses, what we needed to spend for feed, what we had also for veterinary expenses, and there were riding lessons, and then we did some barrel racing, and we had the horse trailer, and we had the vehicle expenses, and we had the entry fees, and we had the hotels. You can see how this is going. Oh, I forgot to do some of the clothing and some other things that went along with that. And at the end of the day, all of these little expenses here and there, that was the biggest thing that they spent money on, was horses. They couldn't believe it. There were some changes that they decided to make, but in their house, it was horses. There have been some incidences where I've looked at it, and because of the dynamics of it, maybe your top priority is childcare. It could be, depending upon what you're spending for it, whether it is during daytime and your working hours, it might be summer camp, after school, whatever the case may be.